You know that this one always has delightful stories coming from it. It's r/NuclearRevenge. I am Vince, asking you a quick favor. Would you please just take a second, even pause this episode, dare I say it, and give us a 5-star review on the podcast platform from which you are listening to this episode. By Otis Deluxe, standing up to my workplace bully, yeah, led to unforeseen circumstances.
Let me start this one by saying that I fully intended to seek revenge on the person in this story, but the aftershock of the eventual confrontation is what led to the aforementioned consequences, rather than my direct actions. I work in the UK for a large technology company doing software support. I'm part of a team that has members all over the world. I've been in this job for around 10 years, and other than the major issues I've had with this guy, I have truly enjoyed my job. When I started with the company, I wouldn't say that I was green. I had about 7 years industry experience under my belt. I was definitely inexperienced with the company, but the job that I had been hired to do used technologies I was more than comfortable with. The point I'm trying to convey here is that I wasn't completely oblivious to all the applications supported by our company. Everyone in my team, around 30 of us, was very nice and was very keen to help, except for Shane. Shane is probably what you term as the team guru. About 5 years from retirement, part of the office furniture, metaphorically as we're all home workers. He'd been with the company for nearly 40 years. Everyone labelled Shane as the only guy to go to when you're truly in a bind. When I was initially starting out, I did indeed find that Shane was highly knowledgeable and more often than not had the answers to whatever obscure question you might have. Things were great, and our team ticked over very nicely. I got to know the rest of the team very well too over time. And my best friend was a woman named Mel. She was of similar age and experience level to Shane, and in my opinion, was just as knowledgeable as him. One day, Mel and I were on a brief call chatting about a work issue when we got to shooting the breeze for a while. We talked about ourselves and also the team. I said that I hadn't met anyone face to face yet, and that was when she told me she'd once met Shane in person a couple of years ago. They're both based in the US, I'm in the UK, and both got invited to a tech conference in New York. She told me he has serious health issues due to his weight, about 450 pounds, and when he was home, was often on oxygen and medication. His plan was to ride things out until he was able to take early retirement so that he didn't need to worry about paying for his medical insurance anymore. That sounded like a reasonable enough plan to me, and we were soon talking about something else. The issue started about 2 years into my tenure with the company. We started moving into a new direction with what application we were going to be offering to customers, and towards that end we were trained in a bunch of new stuff. I saw this as a great opportunity and equalizer. If no one on our team had any experience with this new software, then I would be on equal footing with everyone. This went really well for me, and I put a lot of time and effort into learning as much as possible. Shane didn't show much interest in the new stuff. He still continued to spend most of his time with the legacy tools. In team meetings, you could clearly tell he was getting pissed off that his status as a guru was gradually becoming more and more meaningless. This wasn't anything personal. We work in software and you have to adapt in order to remain competitive. As time went on, it was becoming clear to the team how much work I was putting in, and I was well on the way to becoming the go-to guy for the new software. During this time, Shane would start sniping at me for anything he could plausibly manage. For example, if I was late to a team meeting because a customer call overran, he'd make sure to interrupt whatever was being said to comment something like, "Oh look, it's Awwww Deluxe, he's bothered to grace us with his presence," even though he'd been guilty of the same in the past. Things like email chains too. Almost anything I sent out that included him and our boss on an email, he would reply with some unrelated complaint or observation, completely irrelevant to what was actually being discussed. One day, Mel called me. and asked me what my beef with Shane was. I truthfully told her that I had no beef at all with him, and he just seemed to have it in for me. She said that if she managed to find anything out, she'd let me know. Things continued like this for a couple of years. I continued to be the go-to guy, and he continued to try and discredit me and generally paint me in as bad a light as possible. One day we had a major incident, one that literally could have cost the company millions in SLA fines if it was not solved quickly. Our manager split us into teams to troubleshoot specific areas, and she paired me up with Shane. I wasn't happy about it, but whatever. I was a professional. We got on a call and started working through the issue. As our call progressed, it was becoming abundantly clear why he didn't like me. He knew nothing about the new application. He hadn't done any work on it at all. Everything I asked him to check, he needed handholding, even for the most basic tasks. Eventually, I just shared my screen and said for him to watch me. I went into the guts of the system, through so many logs, explaining to him what I was doing the whole time, and eventually found the problem was with a recent patch we had installed. At this point, he dropped from the call. I didn't think anything of this at the time. We use Skype for business and it can be flaky, so I just continued what I was doing. Our process was not to roll back any changes until it had been approved by the senior manager. As I was the one responsible for deploying and rolling back patches, I made some notes about what we needed to do and then rejoined the main call. I wasn't worried at all because bad patches happen every so often, they just don't usually cause this level of impact. As soon as I did, I got absolutely destroyed by the incident manager. Apparently, Shane had returned to the group call and informed everyone present that the outage was caused by an error that I made in the deployment process, and that Shane had told me what the correct fix was, and I had refused to implement it then and there. I was furious. He had accurately told them the cause of the problem because it was me who literally demonstrated to him how to find it. I had even foolishly mentioned to him what I thought would fix the problem because how long he'd been with the company compared to me. Only our immediate team really knew the truth about who was the better and more skilled person in this situation. His historical reputation still carried a lot of weight with people who didn't work day to day with him, because this incident was so major, over 100 people were on this call. Several of them, 2 or 3 levels of management above our team. Despite my manager's protestations, I was disciplined and given a verbal warning. He meanwhile was congratulated for steering the company away from a potential disaster and given a commendation. I was so angry, and a while later Mel gave me a call. Apparently Shane had been bragging to her about putting that smart-ass punk in his place. She was shocked and asked him what he was talking about. His real beef was that he thought I had disrespected him by trying to take over his role as go-to guy for the new software. This wasn't my intention at all. I didn't see it as my fault that he was too damn lazy to do the work again. I lamented with Mel that she should have reported the call. She laughed and said that Skype shows when you're recording a call and he'd never have spilled his guts while being recorded. I immediately had a brainwave. I decided that I would confront Shane one-to-one. I pinged him on Skype and said that I wanted to talk. He responded with a smiley and just said, "Sure." I called him. I let him know that I was recording this call, and the Skype notification popped up to let all participants know that this call was being recorded. I went right for it and accused him of lying about the major incident and said that it seemed like he had a major beef with me. As expected, he lied and said that he was sorry that I felt like I had to react this way. He said that he would need to talk to our boss about it. I said, "Wait 1 second," and turned off the Skype recorder. I then said that Skype isn't recording and that he knew exactly what he'd done. His mask slipped at this point, and he said that he was perfectly in his rights to put me in my place. He said that you need to respect the longer-serving people in jobs like this and that he would do it again in a heartbeat. I didn't hold back. I called him a dinosaur who refused to move with the times and wanted to coast out his days here without doing any work. He said he was a couple of years away from retirement and he'd be damned if he was going to bust his ass for some shiny new software. I said to him, Speaking of new software, has he heard of OBS? Of course he hadn't, and I suggested he Googled it. I then hung up. Not long after, the messages started. He was begging me not to use the secret recording that I had taken. He said that if he gets fired, he'll lose his retirement package and his medical benefits. I told him to go fuck himself, and that he should have considered that before trying to get me fired. I passed all of this onto the relevant channels before really giving it any thought. Things set in motion, and sure enough, a few weeks later, after a company investigation, he was fired. I heard from Mel that he had asked to take early retirement so as to keep his benefits, but this was apparently rejected. It all came out later that apparently he had significant debts, and that he was counting on his retirement package to keep him financially afloat. With no job and no package, he had no money to pay for the medical treatment which he badly needed. He was in no state to get himself a new job, and his skills had stagnated so badly that he couldn't even get a new job online. Mel told me he died about 6 months after this whole incident due to his ongoing health issues. I felt conflicted about this for a while. Sharing that recording obviously contributed to his death. But I don't know how bad I feel about it. I'm a young guy trying to build my career, and he actively tried to destroy me. I should maybe have held off when he pleaded for me not to reveal the truth, but he was old enough and wise enough to not engage in childish games that he played. If I'd known he'd be dead as a result of this, I'd maybe have done things differently. It's one that stays with me, that's for sure. I'm still at the company, and I can tell you that I will never treat a new employee the way he treated me. So maybe the breaking of that cycle is the positive to come out of all this.
So, confession time. I remember a few years ago, I was outside of a movie theater. It was dark, and there was a crowd, and it was the premiere of Star Wars Episode 1, and yes, I was one of the guys dressed as Darth Vader. So going to the movies for me, it's a fun experience. I have a lot of great memories doing it. And you know what's also great? Saving money. That's where Regal Unlimited comes into play. It is a pretty sweet all-you-can-watch movie subscription pass that pays for itself in just 2 visits. You get any standard 2D movie anytime, no blackout dates or restrictions. And if you want a premium format like IMAX, you get it at a reduced cost. You also get concessions, the non-alcoholic kind, like popcorn, 10% off. So if you're thinking about 2 movies this month, join Regal Unlimited. Sign up now in the Regal app or go to regmovies.com. That's regmovies.com/unlimited. Use promo code RRShowReg. So regmovies.com, that's regmovies.com/unlimited, and use promo code RRShowReg. Darth Vader costume optional.
Our next story is from Throw Ralifts. I beat the shit out of my sister and sent her to the hospital. I can finally talk about this now because all the legal proceedings have been dealt with. So I've been dating my boyfriend Mark for about 5 years. He is the best thing that has ever happened to me. He's kind, smart, understanding, and absolutely beautiful. When we started dating, he was a bit closed off and was afraid to initiate any form of intimacy. I at first thought this was because I was his first relationship. Maybe he was nervous. 6 months into us dating, he tells me that between the ages of 5 and 12, he was assaulted by his mother. His father left when he was around 4. It fucked him up in the head for a while, and when he got out, his mother was arrested, and he and his 2 older sisters were put in the custody of their grandparents, who they lived with ever since. He was placed in intense therapy and still goes to this day. He's come a long way and has healed a lot, but he still has some days when he gets really depressed and cries. Part of his therapy was exercising, so about 2 years ago he and I started doing some bodybuilding workouts. I toned up a lot, put 20 extra pounds of muscle on, and he toned up a bit too. Because we've been dating for so long and have marriage in mind, he told my family, a less detailed version, and they welcomed him with love and support. Now, for my sister, Sally. I've suspected she had a bit of a crush on him. She'll flirt sometimes, here and there, but he never reciprocated and usually ignored her. I talked to her about it so many times, but she didn't listen. To make a long story short, I had gone out on Saturday afternoon with some friends to get some drinks and left Mark behind because he didn't feel like going. My sister had texted me prior to ask if she could borrow a few things from me: a sweatshirt, the DSLR camera, and a third thing that doesn't come to mind at the moment. I said sure, and get it whenever. She went when I was out, unknowingly. When I came home, I found my boyfriend on the ground crying his eyes out and my sister trying to calm him down. He was having a panic attack. It's never safe to touch him when he has an episode because he may act out violently due to his headspace. Her hands were all over him, and he was trying to push her away. Her shirt was also on the ground and she was only in a bra. I tore her away and asked her what the fuck she was doing. She said she was trying on a sweatshirt when Mark walked in on her, freaked out, and went into an episode. However, Mark, through his tears, said she tried to touch him. I asked my sister if it was true and she said no, but Mark again said she tried to touch him. We have cameras in the house and I pointed it out to my sister. Her face went white and I don't know what came over me, but I saw red. I can't remember much because I was so angry, but I beat the shit out of her. I can't even remember if I was the one who called 911 or her. I do remember kinda snapping out of it because Mark was still going through his episode and I could hear him crying louder, and I had to help him through it. It's all a haze. I broke my sister's nose, gave her a black eye, and bruised her ribs. She was in the hospital for a few days. Not quite sure if that one classes as revenge. That might just be straight up assault. Anyway, thank you very much for listening. That's all we've got for... I'm kidding, we got another one. This is from Pimp780. Old fart gets his revenge. This story was from my grandpa, who knew this guy when he was growing up in the 1960s. So we'll call this guy Henry. He was old as shit when this story took place. In New Mexico in the early 1960s, Henry owned a decent-sized ranch. Now, Henry was a badass motherfucker. In his younger days, he fought in World War I and was rumored to be a gunfighter in the last days of the Wild West. He was also rumored to be associated with the mafia in Chicago in the 1920s when he went to college. Henry had about 15 ranch hands and 3 sons. He had lots of cattle and land. His youngest son was in the army at this point in time, and the other 2 had other jobs. A lot of his ranch hands were black and some were refugees fleeing racial violence in the East at that time. So one evening, his guys were attacked and beaten up, and a couple of his cows were killed by unknown attackers. But it was pretty obvious it was the KKK. After assessing the situation, he couldn't really do much, and the police were useless as the town police force was pretty much useless as it had like 2 guys. These attacks continued for a couple of weeks. No one was beat up, but some cows were killed and fences and stuff were destroyed. Henry received a note saying that he had to get rid of all his black workers by the end of the week or they were going to burn down his ranch and kill everyone and everything. So, he kinda said fuck this and called his son, who just happened to be on leave. His son and a couple of his army buddies were on leave and they pretty much had nothing else to do but come by. He was also really good friends with a biker gang in the area, who he probably helped hide bodies on his land. So they came over and helped him prepare. No, he didn't want the police involved, as he was an old fuck and did things the old-fashioned way. So he sent a couple of ranch hands over to town to get drunk and distract the police, and he would bail them out in the morning. Basically, it was 2 underpaid cops trying to contain the drunken madness in a bar in a small town in the middle of NM Desert. So one night, the clan pulled up, ready to trash the place. The remaining ranch hands were having a bonfire and seemed completely oblivious to their impending doom. They were strapped though. Henry had his son and his buddies and the bikers hidden in the barn and sheds ready to attack. When the KKK showed up, they had gasoline cans and some weapons. There was about 10 of them. Basically, it plays out that the cowboys all acted drunk until the bikers and soldiers showed up and surrounded the KKK, and then they pulled their guns out. Now, I never heard if anyone was killed or if he just gave them a good scare, but there hasn't been a single racial incident or animal murdered in that town since. Also, Henry died a couple of years later from cancer. Probably because he smoked and dipped for like 60 years because it was healthy back then. Anyway, Grandpa was cool and knew a lot of badasses like Henry. Alright, let's sneak in one more. This one was posted by In the Hague. Unjustly fire me? Let me make you go bankrupt real quick. This happened a few days ago and still makes me giggle with glee to this day. I'm a 34-year-old female who has always been a bit of a tomboy. I like cars, sports, reptiles. When I was 25, I wanted a career change and finally followed my dreams of working in an auto repair shop as a painter like my father always did. To start my education, I needed to already have a job at an auto repair shop as an intern. So I searched and called a lot of companies to see if they had spots. There were literally several companies that laughed at me because there's no place for a woman on the work floor. Disheartened, I tried one final company who said he'd take a chance with me. I was thrilled. I was promised lots of opportunities to learn and a steady job after graduating. I started a week later, and the first 2 weeks were awesome. I learned a lot and was promised even more opportunities. He promised I would have 2 to 3 hours work a week of private time with the resident painter for practice. Soon after though, it went downhill. The owner had bid on a contract with a large city in our county to restore underground containers. I had to sand them down, put sealant on the edges, and prepare them for painting. Tedious work, but I did it diligently. The promised practice time never happened. After a while, all I did, day in, day out, 8 hours a day, was sand down underground containers. By the end of the day, my hands and wrists were numb from the vibrations. This, by the way, is illegal. You're not allowed to sand with a pneumatic sanding machine for more than 4 hours a day. In my country at least, as it causes severe wrist and hand issues. After several months, the contract with the city ended, and I hoped my promised practice time would come. But no, it didn't. I was given jobs that had nothing to do with my education. I was told to do the jobs that a contractor should do, like put rebar in front of the windows, repair the sliding doors, repair the walls, and other small things. Basically, nothing to do with my desire to become a painter. After 6 months of doing literally nothing that I could count to my education, my boss called me into his office. He told me he was fed up with my attitude, that he had made a mistake hiring me. I was fired on the spot. I was heartbroken and cried the whole way home. I didn't get it. I put 110% into my job, working hard, always on time, staying late if needed, never complained. I didn't understand what happened and was pretty down for a while. However, several days later, I found out I was pregnant, which helped me get over my downness. We'd been trying for over a year, so we were ecstatic. When the time came that my final paycheck should come in, nothing happened. A week after it normally came in, I called but was told to not complain and it would be transferred shortly. 2 weeks later, still nothing. Called again and got a very irate boss on the line, cursing at me and calling me things. I will not repeat them here. I was fed up and contacted my lawyer. So here comes the revenge part. In my country, there's apparently a few laws that my boss broke without me even knowing about them. First, you're not allowed to fire someone without reasonable cause, to document bad behavior and give the employee a write-up. After 2 write-ups, you're allowed to terminate. My boss never did this. Unlawful termination can end in a fine, and the employee has the right to get as many monthly pays as the employment contract would have continued if the employee wasn't terminated. Which means I had a right to another 6 months of pay. Second, you must pay the final paycheck within a week of termination. We were now going on to week 4. After the first week, an employee is entitled to compensation of up to €100 per day of not receiving their paycheck, meaning I was now entitled to at least €2,100 in extra pay. My lawyer wrote up a letter to my boss stating we would be pursuing my legal rights. He didn't respond. A week later, we sent another letter increasing the compensation for late payment as we went. After a month of my lawyer not getting any response, suddenly I received my pay. No compensation, nothing, just my basic pay. My lawyer recommended to go to small claims court, and so we did. Mind you, it takes about 3 months before you can appear before court. He didn't even show up in court, but sent a statement through his lawyer saying how I was a horrible employee and blah 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 blah. However, he had no proof whatsoever. But I did. I had my performance reports from 1 month into employment and 4 months into employment, and they were stellar. The judge saw right through my boss's bullshit and awarded me 6 months' pay, 12,000 euros, 4 months of late payment compensation. This is because he didn't pay the full amount my lawyer requested, as was my legal right, about 12,000 euros, legal fees, about 3,000 euros. I was paid the same week. He was then also charged with a fine for violating employment laws. He had to pay 50,000. This resulted in the Employment Bureau, this agency makes sure companies comply with employment laws, etc., investigating the company. They discovered the building I worked at was unsafe, the foundation was unstable, walls were crumbling and tilting, and told to make repairs or they would close him down within a month. By accident, they discovered he was also cheating on his taxes. So the tax agency got involved. He got charged with embezzlement and tax evasion for both of his companies. He had to pay back all taxes he evaded plus a 100% fine, coming to a staggering 250,000 over several years. He didn't have that kind of money, and after struggling for about 2 months, which resulted in him not paying his other employees, he went belly up. Both businesses shut down and the building I worked at got demolished. 7 years later, it's still an empty plot, and if I ever feel put down by somebody, I take a short drive to that place. And it reminds me, people will sometimes get what they deserve.
So thanks for being with us. The RR Show is a production of Evergreen Podcasts and Wessler Media. Now, if you'd be so kind, please follow or subscribe to our show wherever you get your podcasts. And if you're feeling extra nice, you might as well leave a 5-star review. But for more, visit the website, rrshow.com. That is rrshow.com. I'm your host, Vince. Thank you to my producer, Kevin, and we'll see you next time here on The RR Show.